9:07 a.m. Whitestone Aerospace hangar lights were cold. Single dad, Ethan Walker, a maintenance tech, stood rigid before the new CEO, Victoria Hale. Her gaze was ice. She slid a file across the desk. "You are late," she stated flatly. "You are terminated, immediately." Ethan nodded, knowing it was over. He detached his badge and turned away. His colleagues looked down. Ethan barely reached the entrance when a deafening roar hit them. A Navy Seahawk helicopter landed urgently outside. An officer burst through the doors. His voice cut the silence. "Where is Ethan Walker? We need him. Now." Victoria Hale froze, utterly speechless. Ethan Walker was 39 years old, a quiet survivor, and a single father. His life now revolved entirely around his 8-year-old son, Ben. Ben was a bright kid, imaginative and kind, but he suffered from severe, unpredictable asthma. 5 years ago, a critical complication during emergency surgery claimed Ethan's wife, Sarah, the anchor of his world. Since that day, Ethan's focus had been singular: stability for Ben. He lived a life without complaint, embracing obscurity. Ethan hadn't always been obscure. Before the tragedy, he was a decorated Naval Flight Systems engineer, the best of the best, known for solving impossible technical glitches under extreme pressure. He left the service, turning down multiple high-ranking promotions when Sarah's health began its terminal decline. He needed to trade combat deployment for steady bedside vigil. After Sarah passed, he searched for a job that offered minimal glory and maximum flexibility for Ben's school schedules and hospital visits. That's how he ended up at Whitestone Aerospace, one of the nation's largest defense contractors. He took a low-level maintenance technician job, fixing avionics on retired jets. His experience and deep, specialized knowledge were buried deep beneath a faded uniform. No one knew the truth. Ethan certainly never volunteered it. Victoria Hale, the CEO, represented a new era for Whitestone. She was brilliant, ruthless, and obsessed with cutting costs and boosting stock performance. She was known for cleaning up the machine, which meant eliminating any perceived waste, inefficiency, or lack of ambition. To her, Ethan was just another clock-punching technician, an easily replaceable cog in a massive machine. Today, Ethan was late. He was late coming directly from a battlefield of fear and exhaustion. Ben's severe asthma attack had started at 4:30 a.m., forcing 4 frantic, fluorescent-lit hours in the pediatric ER. The relief when Ben stabilized was immediately replaced by the dread of the clock. He knew the drive was impossible, but he had to try. The digital leave system, recently streamlined by Victoria, required 3 layers of approval for critical absence. A complex process designed to prevent minor sick days, not major family emergencies. The digital ticket, clearly flagged ER visit CN, sat awaiting approval from a mid-level manager who was already too intimidated by the new CEO's rigid metrics to hit approve without checking inventory first. This bureaucratic logjam made Ethan's late arrival look like a willful disregard for policy. Victoria didn't care about the file or the circumstances. She saw an opportunity. In front of a dozen employees, she decided to make an example of him. Her voice was sharp. "I don't tolerate failure to comply with the clock. Whitestone operates on precision, Mr. Walker, not sentimentality. Your emergency is irrelevant to the contract schedule." Ethan didn't fight back. He looked at her, saw the cold, determined set of her jaw, and knew that any defense would be futile. He was too tired to beg, too heartbroken to argue. He simply accepted the verdict. The shame of being publicly dismissed a dull pain compared to the fear he felt for Ben just hours earlier. He removed his security badge, feeling the familiar weight of the world settle back onto his shoulders. As he walked away, he cast one final glance back at the hangar, at the enormous skeletal frames of jets he knew intimately. He thought only of Ben, waiting at home with Mrs. Rodriguez. He left the building with nothing but his worn backpack and the crushing weight of unemployment. The air outside was crisp, quiet, and ordinary. Then the silence shattered. The sky began to vibrate, and the concrete of the tarmac pulsed beneath his feet. The noise grew into an unbearable, screaming roar. A massive military-grade helicopter marked with the insignia of the U.S. Navy descended rapidly toward the executive parking lot. It was an entrance that promised absolute immediate crisis, blowing over the perfectly manicured executive lawn and sending Victoria's staff scrambling for cover. The sudden arrival of the Navy Seahawk was pandemonium. Whitestone's security guards, trained to handle trespassing journalists and disgruntled suppliers, were utterly overwhelmed. They rushed the perimeter, confused and shouting into radios, while the massive rotor wash whipped dust, gravel, and loose papers into a blinding storm. The helicopter touched down hard. The side door slid open before the rotors even began to spool down. A man in crisp fatigues, a high-ranking lieutenant commander, jumped out. He moved with the focused, immediate aggression of someone on a critical mission. He ignored the panicked security detail. He ran directly toward the hangar entrance. Victoria Hale, who had just watched Ethan Walker disappear, was still in the doorway, momentarily paralyzed. Her executive composure returned instantly, driven by authority. She stepped forward, trying to maintain control of her space. "Commander," she said, her voice strained against the helicopter's fading whine, "this is a private facility. You cannot land here without clearance. I demand to know the meaning of this intrusion and who authorized it." The lieutenant commander stopped inches from her. He produced a simple, laminated card, a quick, official flash of authority, and his eyes were fixed, scanning the faces behind her. He didn't ask her name or title. She was merely an obstruction. "I am Commander Hayes," he barked. "I have priority clearance from the Joint Chiefs to extract essential personnel in a life-critical scenario. Your facility is now temporarily under naval jurisdiction. I need to know the whereabouts of Ethan Walker. Now!" Victoria drew herself up, stunned by the sheer urgency in the specific name. "Ethan Walker?" she managed. "There must be some confusion. That man, he was just fired. He is a low-level maintenance technician." She repeated the words, trying to make them sound true to herself, trying to assert her corporate power over his military authority. Hayes didn't blink. He just stared at her with an expression of surgical, professional contempt. His silence was more damning than any accusation. "A low-level technician," Hayes repeated, the title dripping with contemptuous irony. "You mistake the tools for the craftsman, madam. That technician is the single most critical asset in a national security emergency involving Whitestone's own hardware. The lives of 4 highly trained Navy officers are currently hanging on his specialized knowledge, which you clearly never bothered to assess." "Then, Madam CEO," the commander said, his voice quiet now, but weighted with lethal gravity, "you just fired the only man on this entire coast who can save a flight crew of 4, 30 miles offshore, and you just attempted to block a military recovery operation." Victoria Hale staggered back, the cold statement hitting her like a physical blow. The entire room, the supervisors, the managers, the remaining technicians, froze. The silence after the helicopter noise faded was total. A mid-level manager, sweating profusely, rushed up to Victoria, his hands shaking as he spoke quickly, reading a cryptic emergency alert he had just received from Naval Command. "Ma'am, it's a Naval T-45 training jet. It's experienced a rare catastrophic anomaly in the secondary flight control system, a code lock. They're running on minimum power and losing hydraulic pressure. They're too far out for a safe water landing, and the standard system protocols are failing." The alert says, the alert specifically names one civilian expert who successfully mitigated this exact system failure during a classified simulation test 6 years ago. The manager looked at the CEO, his eyes wide with fear and disbelief, emphasizing the classified simulation test detail. "The expert is listed as Ethan Walker." Victoria's mind reeled. She looked back at the hangar entrance, the empty space where the low-level technician had been standing just moments earlier. The impossible truth slammed into her. The man she had dismissed for being a minute late was a secret weapon, a forgotten genius, linked to a world of black ops and national security she couldn't comprehend. Just then, Ethan, who had heard the commotion and the specific query for his name, reappeared at the edge of the tarmac. He hadn't left yet. He stood there, still wearing his faded blue uniform, the fired employee. Commander Hayes spotted him immediately. He executed a sharp, immediate salute. It was the salute of a highly trained officer recognizing a superior mind, appear in crisis. Ethan Walker, by instinct, returned the salute. The movement was crisp, exact, and profoundly military, the kind of movement Victoria had only ever seen in the historical footage. In that single, flawless gesture, Victoria recognized the caliber of the man she had just discarded. "Mr. Walker," Hayes said, dropping the formality for urgency, "you know the protocol. They are losing the secondary loop. Can you work the mitigation from here?" Ethan ignored Victoria, ignored the stunned crowd, ignored the media cameras now swarming the perimeter. His focus was already hundreds of miles away, inside the struggling cockpit. His only question was calm, precise, and professional. "Are there any confirmed injuries?" "Negative," Hayes replied, "but they are approaching critical parameters, sir. They are experiencing wild control surface oscillations." Ethan simply nodded. He didn't ask for his job back. He didn't ask for a security badge. He didn't ask for permission. He moved with a sudden, devastating efficiency that belonged to a different world. Hayes threw open the door of the helicopter. Ethan tossed his backpack aside and climbed into the Navy Seahawk, the blue maintenance uniform a strange contrast to the gray steel around him. As the rotors spun up again, drowning out all sound, Victoria Hale could only watch, pale and shaken. The man she had fired had just been claimed by the United States Navy to save lives, while she stood on the ground, holding his discarded employee badge. The moment the helicopter lifted off, Victoria ran to her office and ordered the retrieval of Ethan Walker's full personnel file. She didn't want the maintenance file. She wanted the original application file, the one detailing his military history. She sat in front of her high-tech monitor as the file loaded, her face drawn. What appeared on the screen was not the profile of a low-level technician. Ethan Walker, former Chief Warrant Officer 4, U.S. Navy, Lead Systems Engineer, Pacific Fleet Aviation. His role wasn't fixing broken lights. It was designing the diagnostic tools for entire carrier groups. He had been instrumental in developing the very flight control software that governed the T-45 jet now in distress. She saw commendations for bravery, not for flying, but for his technical decisions during several high-risk aerial rescues. He had been awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, a non-combat decoration for heroism. She saw a promotion offer, a direct commission to lieutenant commander, that he had vehemently refused. The discharge papers confirmed the reason. Personal circumstances, critical family care. He chose family over rank, service, and a lucrative military career. Victoria sank back in her leather chair. She, the proud, ambitious CEO, had dismissed a genuine hero for being 1 minute late. She had applied a rigid corporate metric to a man who operated on a different scale of values, a scale that prioritized human life and commitment over the clock. She felt a wave of profound, scalding shame. The kind of shame that comes from realizing your judgment was not only wrong, but morally bankrupt. She had never asked why someone was in a low-level position. She had simply assumed a lack of ambition. Victoria realized the coldness of her own leadership philosophy. Her entire corporate structure was designed to reward outward appearance and ruthlessly punish inconvenience. Ethan Walker's refusal of a lieutenant commander commission, a rank she would have killed for in any previous life, was the loudest statement of value she had ever ignored. He had traded a stellar future in the service, sacrificing the power and prestige of his military life, just for the chance to be physically present for his dying wife and ailing son. It wasn't merely a career decision. It was an act of profound, silent heroism that put her ruthless corporate ambition to shame. The lazy technician was, in fact, the most disciplined and principled man in the entire building. Meanwhile, inside the helicopter, Ethan was calm. He was connected directly to the crippled T-45 via a secure satellite uplink. The data stream was horrifying. The plane was struggling to maintain altitude, buffeted by strong winds, and the pilots were wrestling with an unresponsive stick. The system was stuck in an infinite loop, continuously trying to correct a non-existent drift, causing the control surfaces to oscillate wildly. Ethan studied the telemetry data flashing across the Navy laptop. He isolated the source of the rare catastrophic error, the code lock. It wasn't random. It was a ghost he knew intimately. He recognized the specific signature of the fault, a sequence occurring when the primary fly-by-wire system handed off control to the secondary manual override during high-G maneuvers. This handoff was mediated by a module developed by Whitestone Aerospace. Ethan, as the lead engineer, had flagged this exact coding flaw during the initial development phase 4 years ago. It was a subtle, almost undetectable bug, but under certain stress conditions, it caused the system to momentarily freeze, creating a deadly lag. He recalled his formal report. The solution required a complete redesign of the module hardware, an expensive multi-month delay. Whitestone's previous executive team, desperate to meet the aggressive contract deadline and secure a massive government bonus, had ordered the team to mask the error instead of fixing it. They had implemented a $50 patch that simply rerouted the diagnostic warning and shunted the error data into a dummy variable, allowing the system to pass the final acceptance flight tests. Ethan felt a sickening wave of certainty. The plane wasn't crashing because of an accident. It was crashing because of a corporate lie. If the jet went down, it wouldn't just be an operational failure for the Navy. It would expose Whitestone to catastrophic criminal and civil liability. His former employer had placed a faulty, potentially murderous product in the hands of the military, and he was the only one who knew the bypass code. Through the headset, Ethan's voice was a steady lifeline to the terrified pilots. "Pilot, listen to me. Disengage all tertiary backup systems. We are going to force the bypass. Input code sequence. 4 Delta 9 Alpha. Repeat. 4D9A. His instructions were complex, counterintuitive, and entirely reliant on his intimate knowledge of the hidden mask code. The sequence 4 Delta 9 Alpha was the exact trigger for the diagnostic tool he built, forcing the system to recognize the dummy variable and execute a hard reset on the secondary actuator array. The pilots, desperate and trusting the weight of the Navy's call for a single expert, complied instantly. For 27 agonizing minutes, Ethan guided the pilots through a series of manual, high-risk maneuvers designed to trick the software into releasing the lock. He guided their timing, telling them exactly when to execute manual inputs to stabilize the physical aircraft before the reset code took effect. A narrow margin of seconds that separated life from the sea. The wind howled. The aircraft shuddered. On the screen, the critical parameters slowly, miraculously began to stabilize. Finally, the pilot's voice came through, thick with relief. "Control restored. We are flying free. I repeat, control restored." The jet, running low on fuel, landed safely at a nearby military installation. The crew was safe. Commander Hayes, having heard every word, looked at Ethan Walker with unreserved admiration. "Mr. Walker," he said simply, "you saved them." Hours later, the story broke nationally. Reporters descended on the Naval Air Station. Standing on the podium, Commander Hayes, flanked by the 4 rescued pilots, looked directly into the cameras. "The crew is alive and safe," Hayes announced. "They were saved by the unparalleled expertise of one man, a civilian, an engineer. I am talking about Ethan Walker. He is a genuine hero. He is the only reason those men are home tonight." The news cycle was immediately saturated with Ethan's face. Not the tired maintenance man, but the focused, determined savior. Back at Whitestone Aerospace, Victoria watched the live press conference in her office. She saw the images, the Navy Seahawk, the relief pilots, and Ethan Walker, still wearing the uniform of the company that had just publicly disgraced him. The full magnitude of her error in the company's criminal history hit her. She had fired a hero for tardiness, and worse, she had just tried to discard the man who held the key to her company's most lethal, darkest secret. She realized that Ethan had saved the crew, but he had also provided the military with irrefutable proof of Whitestone's deception. The truth hadn't just landed, it had landed on her doorstep. The phone lines at Whitestone melted down. Calls flooded in from military clients, shareholders, and federal regulators demanding immediate explanations. Victoria Hale knew she had 2 choices: join the corporate cover-up and face certain ruin when the full Navy investigation exposed the code flaw, or embrace the truth and salvage what little moral authority she had left. She remembered Ethan's eyes, not the eyes of a lazy technician, but the intense, weary eyes of a father who had chosen responsibility over advancement. She knew what she had to do. Victoria called an emergency meeting of the executive board. She bypassed the standard agenda and projected Ethan's technical analysis, the one he had used in the helicopter, onto the screen. She laid out the truth, the faulty module, the rushed patch, the deadly cover-up orchestrated by the previous administration to secure the contract. The pushback was instantaneous and vicious. "This is career suicide, Victoria," one executive yelled, pounding his fist on the table. "We are talking about billions in liability and prison time. We deny everything. We blame the pilot error and cite Walker's unauthorized tampering." Victoria stood her ground, her voice ringing with a conviction she hadn't known she possessed. "We will not. I did not take this job to oversee corporate homicide. We will halt production of the T-45 immediately. We will issue a full public safety review and recall every unit currently flying. We will tell the truth, and we will cooperate fully with the Navy's investigation." She knew she was not just saving the company's soul, but potentially saving her own from indictment. She had accepted ruin, wearing the financial loss as a badge of honor for the moral cost she refused to pay. Whitestone's stock plummeted 20% by the end of the day. The financial loss was catastrophic, but the moral cost of continuing the lie was higher. Victoria had chosen integrity over profit. Later that evening, Victoria drove alone to the modest house Ethan shared with Ben. She wore no power suit, carried no entourage, and presented no business card. She knocked timidly. Ben, an 8-year-old in oversized pajamas, opened the door. He recognized her instantly from the brief, humiliating exchange in the hangar. "You're the lady who fired my dad," Ben said, his small face serious. Victoria knelt immediately, bringing herself down to his eye level. She looked past her pride, past her title, past her shame. "Yes, I am," she said, her voice surprisingly soft. "And I came here to tell you I made a terrible mistake, Ben. I owe your father a profound apology, and I owe him more than I can ever repay." Ethan appeared in the doorway, drying his hands on a towel. He was calm, unsurprised by her presence. He simply nodded to Ben, who returned to his book, satisfied with the explanation. The conversation that followed was long and silent. Victoria didn't offer excuses. She offered reality. She admitted her ambition had blinded her to humanity. She offered him his job back, not as a maintenance tech, but as the chief safety and systems architect. A new high-powered role with a massive salary and a direct reporting line to her, specifically tasked with overhauling all flight control systems. Ethan listened patiently. Then he finally spoke, his gaze steady. "I don't need a title, Ms. Hale, or a large salary, though I appreciate the offer. I need one thing." Victoria waited. "I need to be available for school pickup every single day at 3:01 p.m., Ethan said, "and I need a schedule that allows me to be with my son for every doctor's appointment and every emergency. That is my priority. The salary you offer must be tied to a long-term escrow account for Ben's medical and educational future, ensuring my focus remains outside the office when he needs me. If you want me back, you accept my conditions and the new governance framework I will introduce centered on radical safety audits." Victoria realized the true cost of greatness. It wasn't about the desk or the power. It was about the hours spent with the people you loved. She accepted every single condition, not out of necessity, but out of respect. For the first time, she learned what true leadership meant. Leading by listening to the silent values of the people you underestimate. Ethan returned to Whitestone, but the world around him had irrevocably changed. He was no longer the invisible man. He was the moral center of the company. His faded maintenance uniform was replaced by the functional, understated attire of an executive, but his priorities remained the same. He worked with the same focus, but now he left promptly at 3:01 p.m. every day to pick up Ben from school. Victoria Hale, transformed by the near disaster, began a fundamental shift in the corporate culture. She instituted flexible hours, emphasized safety and integrity over quarterly earnings, and created a scholarship fund for employees' children, named in honor of the heroism and moral clarity displayed that day. Whitestone still faced a long, difficult recovery, but it was being rebuilt on an honest foundation. The new company Maxim, often attributed to Ethan in internal memos, was simple: humanity before hardware. One afternoon, as Ethan walked across the tarmac towards his car, a Navy helicopter flew low overhead, heading back to its base. It was a familiar sight, but this time, it was just a plane passing by. It didn't land. Ben, waiting by the car, looked up at the roar. "Dad, why don't you fly with them anymore? Don't they need you up there to fix things?" Ethan watched the jet climb toward the clouds, a faint, proud smile crossing his face. "They need the system to be right, son. And I made sure it is. I've chosen to stay on the ground now. My job up there is finished. My job down here is just getting started." Victoria Hale stood on her balcony, watching the father and son leave together. She realized that Ethan had saved her company from destruction, not by being an engineer, but by being a good man whose value system demanded integrity. He didn't seek the spotlight. He simply sought his son. She would forever remember the terrible minute she fired him. It was the lowest point of her professional life, yet it led to the realization that defined her future. She had sought to eliminate the man who appeared least ambitious, only to discover he was the most principled and the most invaluable. She had learned that a corporation can withstand financial loss, but never moral corruption. The narrator's voice closes the story with the final, resonant truth. She fired him in a single, careless minute, but it took the rest of her life to understand why he was the man they should have kept all along. The single dad, once invisible, had taught the CEO that true value is never measured by the clock, but by the weight of what a person chooses to protect. Daddy Healing Stories. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Daddy Healing Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.